Hi everyone, it's Talia from ZEOD, and today I'm going to show you how to make this super cool robot construction. So this is one of my examples that I've done before, and there's a few different ways that you can make your robot construction. I'm going to go for a smaller kind of sculpture today, just in the interest of time, resources, and depending on your student level, you can create something like this, which is a bit of a medium size that can use poly shapes, boxes, whatever you've got, or you can do more of a uniform kind of robot that uses two circles. So we're using paper mache spheres for this construction. And it's a nice one to do for younger students who are just starting to kind of work with more three-dimensional materials and who might need some help putting ideas together to construct something that is 3D. So I'll show you how to make this one, but the techniques and skills that you use for this robot construction can be taken into a more complex project for your more senior year levels. So to start off with our construction, we need to create the base for our work. So I'm using a paper mache ball. I'll be using two paper mache balls, and we're all starting with the same kind of structure. So just one of the balls on top of the other, and then adding some more of those details and features with our shapes, our cogs and gear shapes that we've got here. So these are our wooden ones, and we're also using some corrugated cardboard, beads and buttons to add in some of those features. So to begin, I'm going to cut my corrugated cardboard into a thin strip, and we need this to construct a bit of a neck for a robot, if robots have necks, which in this case my one does. So a thin strip, and just measuring that one on top of the other. You could cut this thinner if you like, but I think that size should be okay. And I don't need all of that card. I'll make a smaller neck. And we're going to be adhering everything with super tack. If I can open the super tack, yes I can. Strong independent woman. So the reason we're using super tack is because it's nice and thick. PVA is a little bit too runny. A glue stick won't adhere things well enough, and you could use hot glue, but hot glue can be a little bit dangerous for younger kids especially. So the super tack is a great middle ground between a PVA and a hot glue, and a little bit of super tack goes a long way. So using your pop stick, just a little bit on the edges, and you will need to hold things for a few seconds to get them to really stick. So in the interest of time and drying time, in this lesson, there are points where it will be good for you to leave your sculpture to kind of dry and to rest in one position instead of moving things around all of the time. So just be aware of that when you're thinking about how to structure your lessons with your students and how much time you have. So for example, at this stage, what I would love to do is leave this to dry and not touch it for a while. So I'm going to leave that up here and just hope that the super tack will adhere nicely. So as you're constructing things, I can tell that I don't have quite enough to stick it down at all points quickly enough. So I'll probably need a lot more super tack on the base of this cardboard. So usually with super tack, a little bit goes a long way, but if you're making 3D constructions that have points of contact that aren't quite sitting exactly on top of each other, then you will need quite a bit more super tack just to fill in those areas. So I have used quite a lot, but that will be good to adhere that together. Now, the trick here is to keep it in a position where it's going to hold and stay. So stay, should be okay. Now we can start thinking about some of our other features. So I've got a panel here that I've kind of thought about what a circuit panel might look like. I've included some wires, I've got some wires here, I've got some buttons, some beads. So all I'm going to do is cut out a small piece of my corrugated card, and that will be our front panel. So as you're cutting out pieces, always think about where it sits on your sculpture. So that is probably around the right size. I'll cut a little bit more off just to make sure it all fits. And what I'm going to do is add some cogs, gears, beads and buttons onto that panel with some super tack. Okay, so as I'm putting things together, things are a little bit fiddly, so what I would recommend is that you can prop your robot guy on something like a board or even a container that you could sit both pieces in. So like a Mache clay container would actually be really good just to hold those two pieces up. So then when you do need to move your sculpture to somewhere to dry until the next lesson or the next week, you don't have to pick up the whole thing and it move and things shuffle around, because the glue will take a little while to stick and some things will stay by themselves, but as soon as I pick this up, things are going to shift around. So where you leave your piece to dry is something that you should consider as you're making it, because all of those little pieces are just being held by a bit of super tack, so things will start to shift and move. So just be aware of that. I'm lucky that I can just kind of push this up a little further once I'm done with it. And as you can see, I've added some cogs and gears. I've used the larger cogs as kind of wheels, but you could give your sculpture some little feet using that same technique with the corrugated card and sticking that on the bottom. You could give it arms, but we're just keeping it simple for this one, so a really simple construction activity. So I'm going to give him some eyes and I'll add some more little details to the top, and then we'll come back and have a look. Okay, so my robot is balancing very precariously all its little features. Actually, it stays on if I do that. But as you can see, the beads up here, they'll stay for about 10 seconds. If I take my fingers off, they won't be staying no more. But if you could balance your sculpture onto something, just put something underneath to rest it, a container that's handily the right size, or even some cardboard props, that will just help keep things in place. So that's important. In the drying time is keeping things in place and letting it dry. Let's just let everything fall. Just go away, robot. That's okay. We've already made one earlier that has dried, but even if you can do this part in sections, or even getting a hairdryer on it to get the glue to dry a bit faster, that's probably the hardest part of this project, is just making sure that the parts you're sticking stay stuck until the next lesson where they're all dry. But I did make this one earlier, and I did do this in parts. So I adhered the cogs to the side as well as the base paper mache. I did the panel separately, so I let the panel dry before I glued it on, and the antenna here as well was part of that main frame of the body. So just be aware of the drying time and how you're constructing all of your pieces together. But once you do have your robot constructed and ready to go, next is the painting phase of the project, which is quite a bit of fun. So to get that kind of rusty, glossy, robot-y finish, first we're going to start with a dark brown. You can get students to mix your colors if you want to. I'm just using this raw umber, and a decent quality paint will save you a bit of time. So make sure that you're not using anything too watery, especially because we're going over things like beads and buttons. The paint doesn't sink in or adhere because they're plastic. So having a decent quality paint is best, and having some brushes where you can really get into all of those nooks and crannies, because there are some very small areas in there that we do need to paint, then that will save you a lot of heartache later on. And the reason why we do want everything to be dry is because if you're going over with your brush and with paint, you might loosen some buttons or something may come off while you're painting it. So having everything dry will just make things a lot easier. So I'm going to coat my whole robot in this dark brown. Okay, so I've done one coat of brown and I'm apprehensive to put it down because there's brown everywhere, and I will actually hair dry this, and I think I'll do another coat, because if you can see on some of these beads, because they are plastic, the paint doesn't absorb, but once you put 2 or 3 coats over the top, the colour of the beads or the buttons that you've used will start to fade into the brownness. So I'm going to hair dry this, come back, add another coat, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so now I've dried my robot. He's got 2 coats, so he's looking a little bit more brown overall. So you just want a nice solid coat of brown for this stage. You want to get into all of the little areas that you might have created. So under the cogs, around the buttons, just get it as brown as you can. Now the next step, to create our rusty kind of finish, we're using either a lighter brown or even a red. So I've got a red oxide here that I'll be using, so it's kind of like that rust color. You could mix your own rust color or use it straight out of the bottle, as long as it's a lighter kind of brown or orangey or red, and don't fall down. And we're going to dry brush, so getting a little bit of paint on your brush. Now the key with a dry brush is that it's going to be dry, so wipe off a little bit of that paint, and then just very lightly we're going over all of the textures that are on our robot. So as you can see, the corrugated card picks up really nicely with that little bit of rusty color. Keep applying small amounts of paint onto your brush and then applying those onto the surface. Even areas that don't have a lot of texture will pick up some really nice texture with that dry brushing technique. So for this stage of the process, we want to go over our whole robot, just emphasizing some of those textures. Don't apply your paint too thick, otherwise you'll just get a robot that is all one color again. So just make sure you're picking up all those little bits of texture and not applying your paint too thick. Okay, I think I'm happy with that dry brushing. So just making sure you get all the way around your sculpture. So any side you look at it is nicely painted. And now the final step, the finishing touches. We don't need to dry this again because the dry brush is quite dry. So it will pretty quickly start to absorb into our paper mache spheres, as well as the wood from the cogs and gears. So straight away we should be able to go over the top with some gold. So I've got gold acrylic paint. You could use a bronze acrylic paint, or you could even use a silver, depending on your choices for your design. Now some areas are a little bit thicker with the paint, but that should still be okay, using a brush that doesn't already have paint on it. Again, the same dry brushing technique, except we're doing it with our metallic paint, so we should get a nice shine over the top. Again, don't apply it too thick. We don't want a solid gold robot. We want it to have that nice, almost rusted, shiny finish to it. So just go ahead and do that back over your sculpture. Okay, happy with him? So he's nice and shiny, but still a little rusty. So he's kind of like old school robot. So I think that is all good. There's a little bit of the cog in here that I haven't quite painted over because I am very fast at painting and trying to get this done quickly, but you could easily spend quite a number of weeks or lessons completing this robot. From the construction phase, that could take 2 lessons. The painting phase could also take another 2 lessons, especially if you're working at a larger scale. But otherwise, this is a good intro activity for your younger students to creating some 3-dimensional models or sculptures, and you can use pretty much any material that you've got across the classroom, whether you want to use some of your poly shapes, cardboard boxes, buttons, beads. I've got some bottle caps on this one. Can clear out your whole storeroom just by making your steampunk or your robot sculptures. But this is a really fun lesson for a variety of year levels, and you can take it to make really unique sculptures, or you can follow a set formula to make some different robots, but still with that same kind of armature or base. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this activity, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.